The rain hammered against the glass windows of Morrison and Associates with such force that it seemed the sky itself was angry. Amanda Clark stood frozen in front of Roger Davison's desk, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. The fluorescent lights of the 32nd floor office in downtown Manhattan cast harsh shadows across her boss's face, making his cruel smile even more menacing. "You're fired, Amanda," Roger said, leaning back in his leather chair with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for this moment. Effective immediately. Amanda felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "What? Roger, I don't understand. My performance reviews have always been excellent. I closed the Henderson account last week. The Henderson account?" Roger interrupted, his voice dripping with false concern. "That's exactly the problem, sweetheart. We've received complaints about your unprofessional conduct with the client." The word hit Amanda like a slap. "Unprofessional? That's a lie. I've never—" "Mr. Henderson himself called this morning," Roger continued, shuffling through papers on his desk without even looking at her. "Apparently you made inappropriate advances toward him during your last meeting. Very disappointing, Amanda. We simply cannot tolerate this kind of behavior at Morrison and Associates." Amanda's hands began to tremble. This couldn't be happening. James Henderson was a 67-year-old married man who had personally thanked her for her professionalism just 3 days ago. "This is absolutely false. Roger, you know me. I would never—" "Security will escort you out," Roger said, pressing a button on his phone. "You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings. And Amanda—" He finally looked up at her, his eyes cold and calculating. "Don't even think about asking for a reference. After what you've done, you're lucky we're not pressing charges." The room spun around Amanda. 5 years of dedication, countless late nights, weekends sacrificed for this company, and now this. 2 security guards appeared at the door, their faces expressionless, trained to handle situations like this without emotion. "This isn't right," Amanda whispered, tears burning in her eyes. "You're doing this because I rejected you, aren't you? Last month, at the company party, when you—" "I suggest you leave quietly," Roger interrupted, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Unless you want me to make sure every company in this city knows what kind of employee you really are." The walk to her desk felt like a death march. 32 pairs of eyes followed her every move as she packed her few personal belongings into a cardboard box. A framed photo of her and her mother who had passed away 2 years ago, a small succulent plant she'd kept alive for 3 years, and a coffee mug that read, "Nevertheless, she persisted." The irony wasn't lost on her. Jennifer from accounting mouthed, "I'm sorry," from across the room, but no one dared to speak up. They all knew Roger's reputation. They all knew what happened to people who challenged him. Amanda was just the latest casualty in his empire of intimidation. The elevator ride down 32 floors felt like descending into hell. When the doors finally opened to the lobby, the rain that had seemed contained behind glass now waited for her like a punishment. Amanda stepped out onto 5th Avenue, and within seconds she was soaked to the bone. The November wind cut through her thin blazer as she clutched the cardboard box to her chest. Around her, thousands of New Yorkers rushed past with their umbrellas and designer raincoats, everyone moving with purpose while she stood there, completely lost. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably David wondering where she was. They were supposed to meet for lunch at their favorite cafe in Greenwich Village. At least she still had David. At least she still had someone who loved her, who would understand, who would help her get through this nightmare. Amanda hailed a cab, her wet hair plastering itself to her face. "Brooklyn, please. Williamsburg." The driver nodded without a word, and Amanda watched Manhattan disappear behind sheets of rain. The 30-minute drive gave her time to think, to plan. She would tell David everything. They would figure this out together. Maybe this was even a blessing in disguise. She'd been so stressed lately, working 70-hour weeks. Maybe now she could finally focus on her painting again, something she'd abandoned when she took the job at Morrison and Associates. The cab pulled up in front of the brownstone apartment she shared with David. Well, technically it was his apartment. She'd moved in 8 months ago, and they'd talked about her adding her name to the lease, but there had never been the right time. Now she was grateful she'd been saving money in her own account. Amanda paid the driver with one of her last $20 bills and ran up the steps to the front door. She fumbled with her keys, eager to get inside, to get warm, to feel David's arms around her, telling her everything would be okay. The apartment was quiet when she entered. "David!" she called out, setting down her wet box on the entryway table. "Are you home? I know it's early, but something terrible happened at work and I really need to—" She stopped mid-sentence. There were women's shoes by the door, expensive heels, red, not hers. Amanda's stomach dropped. "No, no, 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 not today, please, not today." She walked slowly toward the bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices inside, laughing. She recognized David's laugh, and then she heard another voice, a woman's voice. Familiar, too familiar. Amanda pushed the door open. The scene before her would be burned into her memory forever. David, the man she'd been dating for 2 years, the man she'd imagined building a life with, was in bed with Rebecca, her former best friend from college, the woman who had been her maid of honor at her mother's memorial service, the woman she'd trusted with every secret, every fear, every dream. "Amanda!" David jumped up, grabbing for the sheets. "What are you doing home? You're supposed to be at work." Rebecca didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She simply sat there, pulling the blanket around herself with an almost bored expression. "Well, this is awkward. How long?" Amanda heard herself ask, her voice sounding strange and distant, like it belonged to someone else. "How long has this been going on?" David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. Now it just looked pathetic. "Amanda, look, it just happened. We didn't mean for it to—" "How long?" "6 months, Rebecca said flatly. "We've been seeing each other for 6 months. We were going to tell you, but the timing never seemed right. 6 months, half a year. While Amanda had been working herself to exhaustion, while she'd been planning their future, while she'd been faithful and loving and present, they had been betraying her. Every late night, David said he was working. Every time Rebecca had come over just to check on her. Every lie, every deception, every moment of her life for the past 6 months had been built on sand. "Get out," David said suddenly. "This is my apartment and I want you to leave." Amanda stared at him, unable to process the words. "What? You heard me. Get your stuff and get out. I'll give you an hour, and then I'm changing the locks." "David, you can't be serious. I live here." You were never on the lease, Amanda," Rebecca interjected, examining her nails. "Legally, you're just a guest who's overstayed her welcome. David can ask you to leave whenever he wants." The cruelty was breathtaking. Amanda looked between them, these two people she had loved and trusted, and saw them clearly for the first time. They were strangers. Maybe they had always been strangers. Without another word, Amanda turned and walked out of the bedroom. She grabbed garbage bags from under the kitchen sink and began throwing her belongings inside. Clothes, books, her art supplies, the framed photos from her mother's memorial. Everything that made up her life, now reduced to 4 black garbage bags. 53 minutes later, Amanda stood on the sidewalk in Williamsburg with everything she owned, the rain still pouring down as if the universe was determined to wash her away completely. She had $743 in her checking account, no job, no home, and nowhere to go. She started walking, dragging her garbage bags behind her, not caring where she went, just needing to move, to do something, anything. The rain mixed with her tears until she couldn't tell which was which anymore. People moved around her like water flowing around a stone, everyone with somewhere to be, someone to be with, a life that made sense. Amanda found herself on a bench in McCarran Park, completely soaked, completely alone. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen. Who could she call? Her mother was gone. She had no siblings. Her father had left when she was 3. The friends she'd had before David had slowly drifted away as she'd devoted more time to work and her relationship. Roger had made sure no one from the office would help her. Rebecca had been her closest friend. She had no one. For the first time in her 28 years, Amanda Clark was completely, utterly alone. Amanda sat on that bench in McCarran Park for what felt like hours, though her phone told her only 42 minutes had passed. The rain had finally begun to ease into a drizzle, but she was already so wet that it hardly mattered anymore. Her fingers were numb from the cold, and she couldn't stop shivering despite the fact that November in New York wasn't supposed to be this brutal yet. Around her, the park had emptied almost completely. A few joggers braved the weather, their determined footsteps splashing through puddles. A homeless man pushed a shopping cart full of his possessions along the path, and Amanda realized with a sick feeling in her stomach that she might not be so different from him now. 4 garbage bags. That's what her life had been reduced to. She needed to think practically. First priority, find somewhere to stay tonight. Amanda scrolled through her phone, looking at hotel prices in Brooklyn. The cheapest one she could find was $89 a night. At that rate, her savings would last maybe a week, and that was if she didn't eat. She needed that money for a security deposit on a new apartment, for professional clothes, for job interviews, for subway fare. "Think, Amanda, think," she whispered to herself, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. There was a youth hostel in Manhattan that charged $35 a night for a bunk bed in a shared room. Not ideal, but it would stretch her money further. She could stay there while she figured things out, while she applied for new jobs, while she rebuilt her life from scratch. Amanda stood up, her legs stiff from sitting in the cold, and grabbed her garbage bags. She'd have to take the L train into Manhattan, then transfer to get to the hostel. The thought of dragging these bags through the subway during evening rush hour made her want to cry again, but she'd already cried enough for one day. She was halfway across the park when she heard it. The screech of tires, a sickening thud, and then screaming. Amanda dropped her bags and ran toward the sound without thinking. At the intersection of Bedford Avenue and North 12th Street, a crowd was already forming. A black Mercedes had jumped the curb and crashed into a street lamp, its front end crumpled like paper. Steam hissed from the hood, and the driver's side door hung open. "Someone call 911!" A man in a business suit shouted, his phone already pressed to his ear. But it wasn't the driver who had everyone's attention. About 20 feet away, lying motionless on the wet pavement, was an elderly woman. She wore an elegant navy coat that was now soaked with rain and blood. Her white hair had come loose from its pins and spread around her head like a halo. A small brown purse lay a few feet away, its contents scattered across the street. "Is she breathing?" someone asked. "I don't know. I'm not getting close to her. You're not supposed to move accident victims." But she's bleeding." "Where's the ambulance?" Amanda pushed through the crowd, her medical training from her college volunteer days at the campus health center kicking in automatically. She'd spent 2 years volunteering before she switched her major to business, and while she was by no means a doctor, she knew basic first aid. "Let me through," Amanda said, her voice stronger than she'd heard it all day. "Please, let me through." She knelt beside the woman, her knees instantly soaking through on the wet pavement. The elderly woman's face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, but Amanda could see her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. There was a gash on her forehead, bleeding steadily, and her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Amanda asked gently, checking for a pulse at the woman's neck. It was there, but weak and rapid. "My name is Amanda. You've been in an accident. Help is coming." The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. They were a remarkable shade of blue-gray, even clouded with pain and shock. I can't. My chest. Try not to move," Amanda said, pulling off her blazer and pressing it against the head wound to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be okay. Just stay with me. Everyone's just standing around," someone in the crowd complained. "Why isn't anyone helping?" "She's helping," another voice replied. "That girl is helping." Amanda ignored them, focused entirely on the woman in front of her. She'd learned in her training that the first few minutes after an accident were crucial. Keep the victim calm, keep them conscious, monitor their breathing. Don't move them unless absolutely necessary. "What's your name?" Amanda asked, trying to keep the woman engaged. "Martha," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of approaching sirens. "Martha Sterling." "Okay, Martha. You're doing great. I need you to stay awake for me, okay? Can you tell me if you're in pain anywhere besides your head and arm?" "Chest." Martha gasped. Can't breathe. Amanda's training told her this could be a collapsed lung or internal bleeding. The ambulance needed to hurry. She looked up at the crowd. Did anyone see what happened? The car lost control, a young woman with purple hair said, stepping forward. It came out of nowhere and hit her. She didn't have time to move. And the driver's drunk, someone else added. I could smell the alcohol from here. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after the accident, though it felt like an eternity to Amanda. Paramedics rushed over with a stretcher and equipment, their movements practiced and efficient. Good job keeping pressure on that wound, one of the paramedics, a woman with kind brown eyes, said to Amanda. Are you family? No, I saw her and wanted to help. Well, you may have saved her life. Head wounds bleed a lot, and at her age, she couldn't afford to lose much blood. They worked quickly, stabilizing Martha's neck with a collar, carefully sliding a backboard beneath her, starting an IV line. Through it all, Martha's eyes kept finding Amanda's, as if holding onto her presence like a lifeline. Wait, Martha whispered as they began to lift her onto the stretcher. She reached out with her uninjured hand, grasping Amanda's with surprising strength. Don't leave. I won't, Amanda promised, even though she had no idea why she was making such a promise to a stranger. I'll come with you to the hospital. The paramedic nodded. You can ride in the ambulance if you want. Sometimes familiar faces help with shock. Amanda climbed into the back of the ambulance, completely forgetting about her 4 garbage bags sitting in McCarran Park. All that mattered in that moment was the frightened woman on the stretcher, holding her hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become unstable. The ride to Woodhull Medical Center took 12 minutes. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness, but every time she woke, she looked for Amanda first, and every time Amanda squeezed her hand and told her she was still there. At the hospital, everything became a blur of activity. Doctors and nurses swarmed around Martha, calling out medical terms Amanda didn't understand, wheeling her toward an examination room. A nurse stopped Amanda at the door. Are you family? The nurse asked, clipboard in hand. No, I helped her at the accident scene. Then I'm afraid you'll have to wait here. Only family members are allowed in the examination area. Amanda nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. She found a chair in the waiting room and collapsed into it, her wet clothes leaving a puddle on the plastic seat. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of antiseptic and coffee filled the air. Only then did she remember her bags, her entire life sitting unattended in a park in Brooklyn. She pulled out her phone and called the local police station to report it, but the officer who answered told her bluntly that abandoned items were collected by sanitation and taken to a warehouse in Queens. She could try to claim them, but it would take weeks of paperwork, and even then, there was no guarantee they'd still be there. Amanda hung up and stared at the wall. In the span of 12 hours, she had lost her job, her relationship, her home, and now all of her possessions. She had the clothes on her back, her purse, her phone, and $743 to her name. She should leave. She should go find that hostel, get some sleep, and start over tomorrow. Martha Sterling had doctors now, professionals who actually knew what they were doing. Amanda was just a stranger who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. But she'd promised. She'd promised Martha she wouldn't leave. 2 hours passed, then 3. Amanda dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chair, jerking awake every time someone walked past. Around her, the emergency room waiting area filled and emptied in waves. A man with a broken finger, a child with a fever, a teenager who'd cut himself working at a restaurant. Each had their own drama, their own crisis, their own story. At 9:30, a doctor in green scrubs approached Amanda. He was in his 50s, with grey hair and tired eyes that had seen too many emergencies. Are you the young woman who came in with Martha Sterling? He asked. Amanda stood up quickly. Yes. Is she okay? The doctor's expression softened. She's stable. She has a fractured arm, a concussion, and 3 broken ribs, one of which punctured her lung. We've inserted a chest tube, and she's breathing much better now. She's going to need surgery on that arm tomorrow, but overall, she was very lucky. If she'd lost much more blood at the scene, we might be having a very different conversation. Relief flooded through Amanda so powerfully that her knees felt weak. Can I see her? She's been asking for you, the doctor said with a slight smile. She's quite insistent about it, actually. Are you sure you're not family? She seems very attached to you. I just met her today. The doctor shook his head in wonder. Well, whatever you did, you made quite an impression. Come on, I'll take you back, but only for a few minutes. She needs rest. Amanda followed the doctor through a maze of corridors until they reached a private room. Inside, Martha Sterling lay in a hospital bed, looking small and fragile under the white sheets. Her arm was in a cast, her head bandaged, and tubes and wires connected her to various machines that beeped and hummed. But her eyes were open and alert, and when she saw Amanda, her face transformed with relief. "You came," Martha said, her voice hoarse but clear. "I was afraid you'd left." "I promised I'd stay," Amanda said, moving to the side of the bed. Martha studied her face for a long moment, her blue-grey eyes sharp despite the pain medication. "What's your name, dear? I don't think I asked before." Amanda Clark." Something flickered across Martha's face, an emotion Amanda couldn't quite read. Shock, recognition, hope. But it was gone so quickly that Amanda thought she might have imagined it. "Amanda," Martha repeated softly, as if testing the name. "Thank you, Amanda. The doctors tell me you saved my life. I just did what anyone would do." "But they didn't, did they?" Martha's voice was gentle but firm. "I remember lying there, watching people stand around with their phones, filming me like I was entertainment. But you came. You helped. Why?" Amanda thought about the question. Why had she helped? After the day she'd had, after losing everything, it would have been so easy to just keep walking, to focus on her own problems, to be as selfish as everyone else seemed to be. "Because it was the right thing to do," Amanda said simply. "Because you needed help, and I could give it." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "When you reach my age, you learn that kindness is the rarest currency in the world, and you, Amanda Clark, are very, very rich in it." A nurse entered the room. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Sterling needs to rest now. You can visit again tomorrow during regular hours." Amanda nodded and stood to leave, but Martha caught her hand again. "Where will you go?" Martha asked, and something in her voice made Amanda think she somehow knew, somehow understood, that Amanda had nowhere to go. "I'll be fine," Amanda said, forcing a smile. "Don't worry about me." "Wait," Martha said urgently. "There's a card in my purse. The nurse put it in that drawer. Please take it." Amanda opened the drawer and found the brown purse from the accident, now in a plastic bag. Inside was a simple business card with an embossed logo and an address in Manhattan. "That's my home," Martha explained. "Tell Richard, my butler, that I sent you. He'll give you a room for the night. Please, it's the least I can do." "I couldn't possibly." "Amanda," Martha's voice was stronger now, brooking no argument. "You saved my life today. Allow me to give you a warm bed and a hot meal. Please." Amanda looked at the card in her hand, then at the elderly woman in the hospital bed, and felt something shift inside her. Maybe the universe wasn't entirely cruel. Maybe, in losing everything, she'd been put exactly where she needed to be. "Okay," Amanda whispered. "Thank you." "No, dear," Martha said, her eyes drifting closed as the medication pulled her towards sleep. "Thank you." The address on Martha Sterling's business card led Amanda to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, to a tree-lined street where the brownstones and townhouses spoke of old money and older traditions. Amanda stood on the sidewalk at 10:30 at night, staring up at the building that corresponded to the number on the card, certain she must have made a mistake. It wasn't just a townhouse. It was a mansion. 5 stories of pristine limestone facade rose before her, with tall windows that glowed with warm light from within. Iron balconies adorned the 2nd and 3rd floors, and the entrance was framed by 2 marble columns that would have looked at home on a Greek temple. A black iron fence surrounded a small front garden, where perfectly manicured hedges stood like silent sentries. Amanda looked down at her ruined clothes, still damp from the rain, and almost turned around. She didn't belong here. This was a world so far removed from her reality that it might as well have been another planet, but she had nowhere else to go, and Martha had been so insistent. Taking a deep breath, Amanda walked up the stone steps and pressed the brass doorbell. Somewhere inside, she heard a melodious chime, like church bells on Sunday morning. The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s wearing an impeccable black suit. He was tall and lean, with silver hair combed neatly back from his forehead and the kind of posture that suggested decades of military service or classical training. His expression was politely neutral, but Amanda saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in her disheveled appearance. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying a subtle British accent. "May I help you?" "I'm looking for Richard," Amanda said, holding up the business card with trembling fingers. "Martha Sterling gave me this card. She said he would, that is, she offered me a room for the night. I'm Amanda Clark. I was with her at the hospital after her accident." The neutral expression vanished instantly, replaced by alarm. "Mrs. Sterling was in an accident. When? Is she all right?" "She was hit by a car this evening in Brooklyn. She's stable now at Woodhull Medical Center. She has a broken arm and some broken ribs, but the doctors say she'll be okay." Richard's hand went to his chest, and for a moment Amanda thought he might faint. "My God, I've been calling her mobile all evening. When she didn't return home for dinner, I thought perhaps she'd decided to stay late at the foundation office, but I was beginning to worry." He seemed to remember himself and stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please come in. I'm Richard Pemberton, Mrs. Sterling's butler and house manager. Any friend of Mrs. Sterling's is welcome here." Amanda stepped into the foyer and had to suppress a gasp. The entrance hall was bigger than her entire apartment in Brooklyn had been. A crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling that must have been 20 feet high, casting prismatic light across marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors. A grand staircase with mahogany banisters curved upward to the floors above, and the walls were adorned with paintings that Amanda suspected were originals, not prints. "Please don't stand there in those wet clothes," Richard said, his concern now focused on Amanda. "You'll catch your death. Let me take you upstairs immediately and draw you a hot bath. Have you eaten?" No, I haven't, but I don't want to be any trouble." Richard fixed her with a look that was both kind and firm. "Miss Clark, if Mrs. Sterling sent you here, then taking care of you is not trouble. It is a privilege and a duty. Now please follow me." He led her up the grand staircase to the 3rd floor, down a hallway lined with more artwork and antique furniture that probably cost more than Amanda would earn in a lifetime. Finally, he opened a door to reveal a bedroom that took Amanda's breath away. The room was decorated in soft blues and creams, with a 4-poster bed that looked like something from a fairy tale. French doors opened onto one of the iron balconies she'd seen from the street, and through them Amanda could see the glittering lights of the city. A fireplace occupied one wall, already lit and crackling warmly. There was a writing desk, a comfortable reading chair, and a door that led to what she assumed was a private bathroom. "This is the blue guest room," Richard explained. "I think you'll be comfortable here. The bathroom is through that door, and you'll find fresh towels and toiletries already stocked. I'll have some clothes sent up for you. You look to be about the same size as Mrs. Sterling's granddaughter was." Something flickered across his face when he said that, a shadow of old sadness, but it was gone quickly. "Please, take your time with your bath. I'll have a meal sent up within the hour." "Richard, I can't thank you enough." "There's no need for thanks, Miss Clark. Anyone who helps Mrs. Sterling is family as far as this household is concerned." He paused at the door. "She's really going to be all right?" The doctor seemed confident. "She'll need surgery on her arm tomorrow, but yes, she should make a full recovery." Relief washed over Richard's distinguished features. "Thank God. And thank you, Miss Clark, for being there when she needed someone. Now please, make yourself at home." When the door closed behind him, Amanda stood in the middle of the beautiful room and felt the events of the day finally catch up with her. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the plush carpet, her body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back for hours. She cried for her lost job, for Roger's cruelty and his lies. She cried for David's betrayal, for Rebecca's cold indifference, for the years of friendship and love that had been nothing but illusion. She cried for her mother, gone 2 years, but never more missed than in this moment when Amanda needed her wisdom and comfort. She cried for the uncertainty of her future, for the terror of not knowing where she would be or what she would do a week from now. But somehow, sitting on the carpet of this stranger's guest room, Amanda also felt the first stirrings of something else. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin, possibility. Today had been the worst day of her life, but it had also been the day she'd saved someone's life. It had been the day she'd discovered that even when stripped of everything, she still had the capacity for kindness, for courage, for doing what was right. Eventually, Amanda picked herself up and walked into the bathroom. It was larger than her bedroom in Brooklyn had been, with a clawfoot tub, a separate glass shower, and marble countertops. She turned on the tap and watched steam rise as the tub filled with hot water. On the counter, she found an array of expensive soaps and bath oils, all in cut-glass bottles. The bath was exactly what she needed. Amanda sank into the hot water and felt the cold and tension of the day slowly leach out of her muscles. She washed her hair with shampoo that smelled like lavender and honey, and by the time she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel so soft it felt like a cloud, she almost felt human again. On the bed, she found that someone had laid out clothes. A pair of soft grey sweatpants, a cream-coloured cashmere sweater, thick socks and even underwear still in its package. Everything fit perfectly. Amanda was just finishing getting dressed when there was a gentle knock at the door. "Come in," she called. A young woman in a housekeeper's uniform entered carrying a tray. She couldn't have been more than 25, with kind, dark eyes and a warm smile. "Good evening, Miss Clark. I'm Maria, one of the housekeepers. Mr. Pemberton asked me to bring you dinner." She set the tray on the small table by the window, and Amanda saw that it held a bowl of steaming soup, fresh bread, a garden salad, and a pot of tea. The smell alone made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since a granola bar at her desk that morning, a lifetime ago. "This looks amazing," Amanda said. "Thank you, Maria." "You're welcome, miss. Is there anything else you need? More towels? Extra blankets?" "No, this is perfect, more than perfect, really." Maria smiled. "Mr. Pemberton told us what you did for Mrs. Sterling. We're all very grateful. She's a wonderful woman, very kind to everyone who works here. We've been so worried." After Maria left, Amanda sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring every bite. The soup was homemade, rich and comforting. The bread was still warm from the oven. Even the tea was perfect, strong and soothing. With each mouthful, Amanda felt a little more of her strength returning. When she'd finished eating, she walked out onto the balcony despite the cold. The rain had finally stopped, and the night air was crisp and clear. From her vantage point 3 stories up, she could see across the street to Central Park, its trees dark against the city lights. In the distance, the skyline of Manhattan glittered like a promise. 12 hours ago, she'd been standing in an office tower, being destroyed by a man who couldn't stand her rejection. 12 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether David would remember to pick up dinner on his way home. How naive she'd been. How blind to the way her life had been built on foundations of sand. Amanda's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from David and 9 text messages. She didn't read them. Instead, she blocked his number and Rebecca's, and felt a small sense of power in doing so. They didn't get to have access to her anymore. They didn't get to explain or justify or manipulate. They were part of her past now, and she was ready to leave them there. She had just returned inside and was considering whether she was tired enough to sleep when there was another knock at the door. This time it was Richard, looking troubled. "I apologize for disturbing you so late, Miss Clark, but there's been a development. Mr. Edward Sterling, Mrs. Sterling's nephew, has just arrived. He heard about the accident and is demanding to know what happened. He's also asking about you." Amanda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "Me? Why would he be asking about me?" Richard's expression suggested he didn't quite know how to answer that. "Mr. Edward can be difficult. He's Mrs. Sterling's only living relative, or so he believes, and he's very protective of her affairs. I've told him that you're the one who helped her at the accident scene, and he's asked to speak with you. You're under no obligation to do so, of course, especially at this hour." "No, it's fine," Amanda said, even though a sense of unease was settling in her stomach. "If he wants to know what happened to his aunt, I can tell him." "Very well, I'll tell him you'll be down in a moment." Richard paused. "Miss Clark, a word of advice, if I may. Mr. Edward is not like Mrs. Sterling. He can be abrasive. Don't let him intimidate you." Amanda followed Richard down the grand staircase to the first floor, where he led her to a room she hadn't seen before. It was clearly a study or library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and a desk that looked like it had witnessed a century of important decisions. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and standing in front of it was a man who radiated impatience and barely contained anger. Edward Sterling was probably in his early 50s, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if not for the permanent sneer that seemed etched into his features. He wore an expensive suit and a Rolex that caught the firelight, and he looked at Amanda as if she were something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "So you're the girl who was with my aunt," Edward said without preamble. His voice was sharp and accusatory, like a prosecutor addressing a defendant he knew was guilty. "I want to know exactly what happened tonight, and I want to know what you were doing with her." Amanda felt her spine stiffen. After the day she'd had, she was in no mood to be interrogated like a criminal. "Your aunt was hit by a car at the intersection of Bedford Avenue and North 12th Street in Brooklyn. I was walking through McCarran Park when I heard the accident. I provided first aid until the paramedics arrived, and I rode with her to the hospital. That's what happened." "How convenient," Edward said, his eyes narrowing. "And tell me, Miss, what was your name?" "Clark, Amanda Clark." Tell me, Miss Clark, how much did my aunt promise to pay you for this heroic rescue?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Amanda felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "She didn't promise me anything. I helped her because she needed help." "How noble!" Edward's tone made the word sound like an insult. "And yet here you are, installed in one of the guest rooms of a very wealthy woman's home, wearing expensive clothes, having just eaten dinner prepared by a private chef. Forgive me if I'm skeptical of your altruism." "Edward, that's enough." Richard's voice was quiet but firm. "Miss Clark is here at Mrs. Sterling's explicit request. She saved your aunt's life tonight, and she deserves respect, not interrogation." "You stay out of this, Richard," Edward snapped. "This is family business." "Then perhaps you should have been there when your aunt needed family," Richard replied, his British reserve finally cracking. "Instead, it was Miss Clark, a complete stranger, who ensured your aunt didn't bleed to death on a Brooklyn street corner." Edward's face flushed red, and for a moment Amanda thought he might actually attack Richard. Instead, he turned his fury back on her. "I want to see proof of what you're claiming. Hospital records, police reports. Something that proves you were actually there and not just some con artist who saw an opportunity." "I don't have to prove anything to you," Amanda said, her own anger finally breaking through. "Your aunt knows what happened because she was there. If you don't believe me, ask her yourself when you visit her at the hospital, which, by the way, is where you should be right now instead of here harassing the person who saved her life." The moment the words left her mouth, Amanda regretted them. She was a guest in this house after all, and Edward Sterling was family. She had no right to tell him what to do, but Edward didn't explode the way she expected. Instead, a calculating look came into his eyes, something cold and sharp that made Amanda's skin crawl. "You're very defensive for someone with nothing to hide. Tell me, Miss Clark, what were you really doing in Brooklyn tonight? What were you running from?" The question was too accurate, too pointed. Amanda felt as if he could see right through her, see all the weakness and desperation she'd been trying to hide. "That's none of your business." "Everything involving my aunt is my business," Edward said softly, dangerously. "She's 83 years old and worth $5.7 billion. That makes her a target for every scammer, con artist and fortune hunter in the city. So yes, Miss Clark, when some bedraggled stranger appears out of nowhere and worms her way into my aunt's home, that becomes very much my business." "I think you should leave now, Mr. Sterling," Richard said. moving to stand beside Amanda in a gesture of silent support. "Mrs. Sterling invited Miss Clark here, and until Mrs. Sterling says otherwise, Miss Clark is welcome in this home. You, on the other hand, are not a resident here, and I must ask you to leave." "Fine," Edward said, but his eyes never left Amanda's face. "But I'll be watching you, Miss Clark, very closely, and if I find out you're trying to take advantage of my aunt in any way, you'll regret it. That's not a threat. It's a promise." He stalked out of the room, and a moment later, Amanda heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. "I'm terribly sorry about that," Richard said, his formal composure slipping to reveal genuine distress. "Mr. Edward has always been difficult, but he's been especially bitter since Mrs. Sterling changed her will 5 years ago to leave most of her estate to charity. He'd been counting on inheriting everything." $5.7 billion, Amanda repeated faintly. "Martha is worth $5.7 billion, give or take a few hundred million," Richard said with a slight smile. "She's one of the wealthiest women in the country. Sterling Industries started with her great-grandfather in 1886, manufacturing textiles. Over the generations, the company diversified into technology, pharmaceuticals, and real estate. Mrs. Sterling took over as CEO when her husband died 30 years ago and tripled the company's value before she retired." Amanda sank into one of the leather chairs, her mind reeling. She'd saved the life of one of the richest people in America and hadn't even known it. No wonder Edward was suspicious. No wonder he thought she was some kind of con artist. From his perspective, it probably did look too convenient, too perfect. "Richard," Amanda said slowly, "maybe I should leave. I don't want to cause any trouble, and clearly my being here is going to create problems with Edward." "Absolutely not," Richard said firmly. "Mrs. Sterling invited you here, and you are welcome to stay as long as you wish. Mr. Edward has no say in this household, and his opinion matters not at all. Besides," he added more gently, "where would you go at this hour?" It was a good question, and they both knew Amanda didn't have a good answer. "Get some rest, Miss Clark," Richard said kindly. "Tomorrow will be better, I promise. And when Mrs. Sterling is feeling stronger, I think you'll find she has much she wants to say to you." There was something in his tone, some hidden meaning Amanda couldn't quite grasp, but she was too exhausted to puzzle it out. She thanked Richard and made her way back upstairs to the blue guest room. The bed was as comfortable as it looked, and the sheets smelled of lavender. Amanda turned off the lights and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house settling around her. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed midnight, marking the end of the worst and strangest day of her life. She thought about Martha Sterling, lying in a hospital bed, alone except for nurses and doctors. She thought about Edward's cold eyes and calculating cruelty. She thought about the fact that she'd somehow stumbled into the life of a billionaire, that she was sleeping in a mansion on the Upper East Side, that everything had changed in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. But mostly, she thought about Martha's words in the hospital. "Kindness is the rarest currency in the world." Amanda had spent her whole life trying to be kind, trying to do the right thing, trying to be good. And where had it gotten her? Fired, betrayed, homeless. But tonight, that same kindness had led her here to safety and warmth and possibility. Maybe the universe wasn't entirely cruel after all. Maybe sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing mattered. With that thought, Amanda finally fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Amanda woke to sunlight streaming through the French doors and the sound of birds singing in the garden below. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and then it all came flooding back. The accident, Martha, this impossible mansion. She checked her phone and saw it was 8:37 in the morning, Wednesday morning. Just yesterday, she'd woken up in David's apartment thinking she had a career, a relationship, a life that made sense. There was a soft knock at the door, and Maria entered with a tray. "Good morning, Miss Clark. I brought you breakfast. Mr. Pemberton thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning rather than come down to the dining room." "That's very thoughtful," Amanda said, sitting up. "Maria, do you know if there's been any news from the hospital about Mrs. Sterling?" "Mr. Pemberton called first thing this morning. They said her surgery is scheduled for 10 o'clock, and they expect it to go well. He's planning to go to the hospital around noon, after the surgery is complete. After Maria left, Amanda ate the breakfast. Perfectly poached eggs, fresh fruit, toast with homemade jam, and coffee that tasted better than anything she'd ever bought at a cafe. She showered and dressed in more of the clothes that had been left for her: dark jeans, a soft white blouse, and a navy cardigan. Everything fit as if it had been made for her. She was just finishing when Richard knocked and entered, his expression grave. "Miss Clark, I'm afraid we have a situation. Mr. Edward returned this morning with his lawyer, a Dr. Henry Blackwood. They're demanding to speak with you, and they've brought accusations." Amanda's stomach dropped. "What kind of accusations?" "It might be best if you heard it from them directly. I'll be there with you, and I want you to know that Mrs. Sterling's personal attorney, Margaret Chen, is on her way. She should be here within the hour." They went downstairs to the same study where Amanda had met Edward the night before. He was there again, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man in his 60s with silver hair slicked back and cold grey eyes that reminded Amanda of a shark. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase that he set on the desk with deliberate precision. "Miss Clark," the man said, his voice smooth and cultured, "I'm Dr. Henry Blackwood, attorney at law. I represent Mr. Edward Sterling in family matters. Please have a seat." Amanda remained standing. "I'd rather stand, thank you." "What's this about?" Dr. Blackwood opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "Mr. Sterling has asked me to conduct a background investigation into you, given your sudden appearance in his aunt's life. What we've discovered is quite disturbing." He laid out the first document, and Amanda felt her blood run cold. It was a printout of an email, and even from across the desk she could see it bore the Morrison and Associates logo. "This is a letter from your former employer," Dr. Blackwood continued, "detailing why you were terminated yesterday. Sexual harassment of a client, specifically one James Henderson, creating a hostile work environment, violating company ethics policies. Quite serious allegations, Miss Clark." "Those are lies," Amanda said, her voice shaking with anger. "Roger Davison fabricated those accusations because I rejected his advances." "Do you have proof of that?" Dr. Blackwood asked mildly. No, but then it's your word against your employers, and frankly, they have documentation while you have none." He laid out another document. "We've also spoken with your former boyfriend, David Mitchell, and your former friend, Rebecca Hartley. They've provided statements describing your erratic behavior over the past several months: mood swings, paranoia, an obsession with money and social status. Mr. Mitchell states that you became verbally abusive when he tried to end the relationship. That's a complete fabrication." Amanda's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "David cheated on me. I found him in bed with Rebecca yesterday." "Again, that's your version of events," Dr. Blackwood said. "Mr. Mitchell tells a very different story. He says you became irrational when he tried to have an honest conversation about the future of your relationship, and that you stormed out making wild accusations." Amanda looked at Edward, who was watching her with cold satisfaction. "You paid them to lie, didn't you? You paid David and Rebecca to say these things." "I don't need to pay people to tell the truth," Edward said smoothly. "The facts speak for themselves. You lost your job due to serious misconduct. Your relationship ended because of your unstable behavior. And then, conveniently, you were in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to rescue one of the wealthiest women in America. Forgive me if that seems a bit too coincidental." "That's absurd. I didn't even know who she was." "Didn't you?" Dr. Blackwood pulled out another document, this one a printout of a news article. "This is from the Society pages of the New York Times, dated 3 weeks ago. It shows Mrs. Sterling at a charity gala. The article mentions her daily routine, including her habit of visiting the Sterling Foundation office in Brooklyn every Tuesday. Interesting that you were in that exact neighborhood on a Tuesday, isn't it?" Amanda's mind raced. She had been in Brooklyn yesterday, but only because that's where David's apartment was. The accident had been blocks away from where she'd started walking. It had been pure chance, pure, terrible, wonderful chance. "This is insane," she said. "You're twisting everything to fit your narrative." "Am I?" Edward stepped forward, his eyes glittering with malice. "Or are you a desperate, disturbed woman who saw an opportunity and took it? You lose everything in one day, and suddenly you're the hero who saves a billionaire. You end up installed in her home, wearing her clothes, eating her food. How long before you start asking for money? How long before you try to manipulate her into changing her will?" "I would never—" "My aunt is 83 years old," Edward interrupted. "She's vulnerable, and you're taking advantage of that vulnerability. That's called elder abuse, Miss Clark, and it's a crime." Richard stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Mr. Sterling. These accusations are outrageous and unfounded. Miss Clark has done nothing but show kindness to Mrs. Sterling." "Kindness?" Edward laughed harshly. "Is that what we're calling it? I call it fraud, Richard. I call it manipulation. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person Amanda Clark really is." The room fell silent. Amanda felt as if the walls were closing in on her. She'd thought yesterday was the worst day of her life, but this was somehow even worse. At least yesterday's betrayals had been private. This was public, documented, designed to destroy not just her present, but her future. "I have one question, Miss Clark," Dr. Blackwood said quietly. "If you're truly innocent, if you truly have no ulterior motives, why don't you simply leave? Walk away now, and Mr. Sterling won't pursue this matter further. Stay, and will be forced to take legal action to protect Mrs. Sterling from your influence." It was a trap, Amanda realized. If she left, it would look like an admission of guilt. If she stayed, they'd use it as proof that she was after Martha's money. There was no winning, no way out. "I'm not leaving until I can talk to Martha," Amanda said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "She invited me here. She asked me to stay. And I'm not going to run away just because her nephew is a paranoid, greedy—" "Careful," Edward warned softly. "Slander is also a crime." "Is accusing me of elder abuse not slander?" Amanda shot back. "Or does that only apply when it's convenient for you?" The front door opened, and a woman's voice called out, "Richard, I got here as soon as I could." A moment later, a woman in her 40s entered the study. She wore a perfectly tailored grey suit and carried a briefcase that matched Dr. Blackwood's. Her black hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and her dark eyes took in the scene with sharp intelligence. "Margaret," Richard said with obvious relief. "Thank God you're here." "Margaret Chen," the woman said, extending her hand to Amanda. "I'm Mrs. Sterling's personal attorney and the executor of her estate. I understand there's been some unpleasantness this morning." "Unpleasantness?" Edward sneered. "That's one way to describe it." "We're trying to protect my aunt from a con artist." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something cold flashed in her eyes. "Is that so? Dr. Blackwood, may I see the evidence you've compiled?" For the next 20 minutes, Margaret reviewed every document, every accusation, every twisted piece of so-called evidence. Her face remained neutral, but Amanda could see her mind working, analyzing, looking for weaknesses in their case. Finally, Margaret set down the papers and looked at Edward. "This is quite the elaborate story you've constructed. I'm impressed by the effort, if not the ethics." "What's that supposed to mean?" Edward demanded. "It means these accusations are circumstantial at best and fraudulent at worst. Let's start with the employment termination. Miss Clark, have you been served with any legal papers from Morrison and Associates regarding these allegations?" "No," Amanda said. "Nothing. That's because they don't want to file anything official," Margaret said. "If they did, you could sue them for wrongful termination and defamation. This letter is carefully worded to imply wrongdoing without making any claims specific enough to be legally actionable. It's a scare tactic, nothing more." "That doesn't prove she's innocent," Dr. Blackwood interjected. "No, but it doesn't prove she's guilty either. And in this country, we presume innocence until guilt is proven beyond a reasonable doubt." Margaret turned to the next document. "As for the statements from Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Hartley, I noticed neither of them signed these under oath. They're just informal interviews with no legal weight whatsoever. For all we know, You wrote these yourself and put their names on them. Are you accusing me of fabricating evidence? Dr. Blackwood's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm saying these documents wouldn't last 5 minutes in a court of law, Margaret replied calmly. And finally, this business about the newspaper article proving premeditation. That's absurd. Half the city of New York reads the Times Society pages. By your logic, anyone who read that article and happened to be in Brooklyn yesterday is a potential suspect. The timing is too convenient, Edward insisted. Life is full of coincidences, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes people are in the right place at the right time. Sometimes good things happen to good people. I know that's a difficult concept for you to grasp. Edward's face turned purple. How dare you? I dare, because I've known you since you were a child, Edward, and I've watched you grow into exactly the kind of man your uncle feared you'd become. Greedy, cruel, willing to destroy anyone who threatens your access to your aunt's fortune. That fortune should be mine. I'm her only living relative. Except you're not, Margaret said quietly. The room went utterly still. Amanda felt as if the air itself had stopped moving. What did you say? Edward whispered. Margaret walked to the desk and pulled out her own briefcase. From it, she extracted a thick manila folder. Mrs. Sterling has kept this secret for 28 years, but given the circumstances, I believe it's time the truth came out. Miss Clark, how old are you? 28, Amanda said, confused. I'll be 29 in March. And when is your birthday specifically? March 15th. Margaret nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already known. She opened the folder and pulled out a document, handing it to Amanda. This is a birth certificate. I think you should read it. With trembling hands, Amanda looked at the document. It was old, yellowed with age, dated March 15th, 28 years ago. The mother's name was listed as Elizabeth Sterling. The father's name was listed as Michael Clark. Amanda's eyes blurred with tears as she read the baby's name, Amanda Rose Clark. I don't understand, she whispered. Elizabeth Sterling was Martha's daughter, Margaret explained gently, her only child. Elizabeth fell in love with a man named Michael Clark when she was 24. Martha disapproved of the match. She thought Michael was after the family fortune. They fought bitterly, and Elizabeth left home. She married Michael in secret and got pregnant with you. Martha was devastated by the estrangement, but she was too proud to reach out, too stubborn to apologize. Margaret pulled out another document, this one a death certificate. Elizabeth died in childbirth. There were complications, and Michael couldn't handle losing his wife. He suffered a breakdown. He signed away his parental rights and disappeared. The hospital tried to contact Martha, but Elizabeth had listed a different name as next of kin, and by the time Martha found out, you'd already been placed with foster parents. Amanda couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and she reached out to grab the edge of the desk to steady herself. Martha spent years searching for you, Margaret continued, her voice soft with compassion. She hired investigators, contacted every adoption agency in New York, but the records were sealed. She never gave up hope that someday she'd find you. And yesterday, when you gave her your name, when she saw your face, she knew. She knew immediately who you were. That's impossible, Edward said, but his voice had lost its certainty. This is some kind of trick. We can do a DNA test to confirm it, Margaret said, but I don't think we'll need to. The resemblance between Amanda and Elizabeth is striking. Richard, would you bring me the photo album from Mrs. Sterling's study? Richard disappeared and returned moments later with a leather-bound album. Margaret opened it to a page marked with a ribbon and turned it toward Amanda. The woman in the photograph was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair and blue-green eyes that sparkled with life. She was laughing at the camera, one hand raised to shield her face from the sun, and Amanda felt as if she were looking at a mirror image of herself. That's your mother, Margaret said gently. That's Elizabeth. Amanda touched the photograph with shaking fingers. This woman, this beautiful, vibrant woman, had given her life so that Amanda could live. This woman was why Amanda had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home, never quite belonging anywhere. This woman was the reason Martha Sterling had been searching for 28 years. Martha wants to tell you herself, Margaret said. She made me promise not to say anything until she could talk to you face to face. But Edward's accusations forced my hand. She's going to be furious with me, but I couldn't let him destroy you with lies when the truth is so much more important." Amanda looked at Edward, who had gone pale, all his arrogance stripped away in an instant. "You knew, didn't you?" Amanda said. "You knew Martha was looking for her granddaughter, and you were afraid of what would happen if she found me." "No," Edward said, but it sounded weak. "I didn't know. I thought Elizabeth's baby died with her." "You thought, or you hoped." Margaret's voice was sharp. "Because if Martha found her granddaughter, you'd have to share your inheritance, or more likely, you'd lose it entirely. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You saw Amanda with Martha, and you panicked. You scrambled to dig up dirt, to manufacture a scandal, anything to discredit her before Martha could tell her the truth." Dr. Blackwood stood abruptly, closing his briefcase. "I think we're done here. Edward, I'd advise you to say nothing more without counsel present." "Excellent advice," Margaret agreed. "I'd also advise you to leave this house immediately and not return unless Mrs. Sterling explicitly invites you. And Edward, if you make any of these baseless accusations public, if you try to harm Amanda's reputation in any way, I will personally ensure that you're charged with defamation, harassment, and attempted fraud. Do I make myself clear?" Edward's jaw worked as if he wanted to argue, but no words came out. Finally, he turned and stalked out of the study, Dr. Blackwood following close behind. When they were gone, Amanda sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to hold her. "I can't believe this. I can't believe any of this." "I know it's a shock," Margaret said, sitting beside her. "But Amanda, you need to understand something. Martha has been waiting for this moment for nearly 3 decades. Finding you yesterday, it's a miracle, a true miracle." "She must have been so afraid," Amanda whispered. "When I told her my name, she must have been terrified it wasn't real, that she was wrong." "She called me from the hospital last night," Richard said quietly, "after you left. She was crying, something I've only seen her do once before, at Elizabeth's funeral. She told me about you, about how you helped her, about your kindness. She said it was like having Elizabeth back again, even just for a moment." Amanda thought about Martha's words in the hospital. "Thank you, Amanda." How much weight those words had carried. How much hope and joy and answered prayers had been packed into those 3 syllables. "I need to see her," Amanda said, standing up. "I need to go to the hospital right now. Her surgery should be finishing soon," Margaret said, checking her watch. "We can leave in 15 minutes and be there when she wakes up." Those 15 minutes felt like 15 hours. Amanda paced the study, looking at photographs of Elizabeth, of Martha, of a family she'd never known she belonged to. There was a photo of a young Martha holding a baby, and Richard confirmed it was Elizabeth, just days old. Martha looked so young in the picture, so full of hope for the future she'd dreamed for her daughter, a future that had been stolen by tragedy and pride and terrible timing. Finally, they drove to the hospital in Martha's car, a sleek black Mercedes driven by a chauffeur named Thomas. The ride took 23 minutes, and with every passing block, Amanda's heart beat faster. She was about to meet her grandmother. Her grandmother. The word felt foreign and wonderful and terrifying all at once. At the hospital, Margaret's name and position got them immediate access to the private recovery room where Martha had been taken after surgery. A nurse warned them that Mrs. Sterling was still groggy from anesthesia, but was awake and asking for someone named Amanda. The room was quiet except for the beep of monitors. Martha lay in the bed, her arm now in a proper cast, her face still pale, but her eyes bright and alert. When she saw Amanda in the doorway, her entire face transformed with joy, so pure it was almost painful to witness. "Amanda," Martha whispered, "you came back." Amanda walked slowly to the bedside, her vision blurring with tears. "Of course I came back. I promised I wouldn't leave." "I knew," Martha said, reaching out with her good hand. Amanda took it, marveling at how small and fragile it felt. How precious. "The moment you told me your name, the moment I saw your eyes, I knew. You have Elizabeth's eyes. You have her kindness, her spirit. You're my granddaughter, my Amanda, Margaret told me everything, Amanda said through her tears. About my mother, about how you've been searching for me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to wait so long. Don't apologize, Martha said fiercely. Don't you dare apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who should apologize. I drove Elizabeth away because I was foolish and stubborn and blind. I lost her because of my pride, and I've lived with that regret every day for 28 years. But yesterday, the universe gave me a second chance. It gave me you. I don't know what to say, Amanda whispered. I don't know how to be someone's granddaughter. I don't know how to be part of a family. Neither do I, Martha said with a tearful laugh. I've been alone for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to have family. But we'll figure it out together. We have time now. We have all the time in the world. Margaret cleared her throat gently. Martha, I need to tell you something. Edward was at the house this morning with Henry Blackwood. They tried to accuse Amanda of being a con artist. They'd manufactured evidence, twisted facts, tried to make her look like she was manipulating you. I had to tell her the truth, to stop them. Martha's expression hardened. Edward did what? He was afraid, Margaret said simply. Afraid of losing his inheritance to Amanda. He never had an inheritance to lose, Martha said coldly. I wrote him out of my will years ago. Everything I have is going to charity and to the Sterling Foundation. But now, she looked at Amanda, her eyes softening. Now that changes. Amanda, I want you to understand that this isn't about money. You don't need to inherit anything to be my granddaughter. You already are, and nothing will change that. I don't want your money, Amanda said quickly. I don't want anything except to know you, to understand where I came from. I know you don't, Martha said. That's how I know you're really Elizabeth's daughter. You have her heart. But Amanda, I'm 83 years old. I won't live forever, and when I'm gone, I want to know that everything I've built will be in good hands. I want to know that the Sterling name will continue to mean something, that it will represent kindness and generosity and making the world better. I think you understand that in a way, Edward never could. Over the next 3 hours, Martha told Amanda everything. She told her about Elizabeth, about how bright and beautiful and stubborn she'd been. She told her about Michael, about how he'd been a good man destroyed by grief. She told her about the years of searching, the false leads, the crushing disappointments. She told her about the hole in her heart that had never healed, the granddaughter-shaped space that nothing had ever filled. And Amanda told Martha about her life, about growing up in foster care, about the kind families and the not-so-kind ones, about her mother who had adopted her at age 16 and given her 8 wonderful years before cancer took her away. She told her about college, about her job at Morrison and Associates, about Roger and David and Rebecca. She told her about losing everything in a single day and how that loss had led her to the intersection where Martha needed her most. It's like fate, Martha said wonderfully. Everything you went through, every hardship, every loss, it all led you to that exact moment. If you'd still had your job, you wouldn't have been in Brooklyn. If David hadn't betrayed you, you wouldn't have been walking through McCarran Park. Sometimes terrible things happen for reasons we can't understand until much later. I don't know if I believe in fate, Amanda said, but I believe in second chances. I believe that sometimes, when you lose everything, you find what you were looking for all along. Martha squeezed her hand. What were you looking for, darling? Family, Amanda said simply. I've been looking for family my whole life. Martha's eyes filled with tears again. Well, you found me, or I found you. I suppose it doesn't matter who found whom, does it? What matters is that we're here now together. Later that evening, when Martha was resting comfortably and Amanda was preparing to return to the mansion, Margaret pulled her aside in the hallway. There's something you should know, Margaret said. Edward isn't going to give up easily. He'll fight this, challenge it in court if necessary. He'll try to prove you're not really Elizabeth's daughter, that the whole thing is an elaborate fraud. Let him try, Amanda said, surprised by her own confidence. We have DNA evidence. We have photographs. We have the truth. Truth doesn't always win in court, Margaret warned. Money and power and good lawyers can twist facts into unrecognizable shapes. This could get ugly, Amanda. Are you prepared for that? Amanda thought about everything she'd been through in the past 2 days. She thought about Roger's cruelty and David's betrayal and Rebecca's cold indifference. She thought about Edward's calculating eyes and Dr. Blackwood's smooth lies. She'd survived all of that. She'd survived losing everything and discovering she was stronger than she'd ever known. "I'm prepared," Amanda said. "Martha is my grandmother. That's the truth, and no amount of money or manipulation or legal tricks can change it. If Edward wants a fight, he'll get one." Margaret smiled, and for the first time, Amanda saw approval in her eyes. Good, because Martha needs someone strong in her corner. Someone who won't back down, who won't be intimidated, who understands that family is worth fighting for. "I won't let her down," Amanda promised. "I don't think you could if you tried," Margaret said. "You're a Sterling, Amanda, and Sterlings don't give up." That night, back in the blue guest room that would become Amanda's permanent home, she stood on the balcony and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Roger was probably sleeping soundly, secure in his power and his cruelty. Somewhere out there, David and Rebecca were building their future on the foundation of their betrayal. Somewhere out there, Edward was plotting his next move, determined to destroy her before she could claim what was rightfully hers. But Amanda wasn't afraid anymore. She'd lost her job, her relationship, her home, and in losing everything, she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself, she'd found her strength, she'd found her family. The universe had taken everything from her and given her back the one thing she'd always wanted, a place to belong. Amanda pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. She began to write, not knowing exactly what she was creating, but needing to capture this moment, this feeling of standing on the edge of a new life. "Once upon a time," she typed, "there was a girl who lost everything in a single day. Her job, her love, her home. She sat on a bench in the rain with nothing but 4 garbage bags and $743, certain that her life was over. But what she didn't know was that losing everything was just the beginning. Because sometimes you have to lose who you think you are to discover who you were always meant to be." She saved the note and put her phone away. Tomorrow she would visit Martha again. Tomorrow they would begin the process of becoming a family, of learning each other's rhythms and preferences and quirks. Tomorrow, she would start working with Margaret to prepare for whatever legal battle Edward might wage. Tomorrow, she would begin her new life as Amanda Clark Sterling, granddaughter, heiress, and most importantly, family. But tonight, she would simply stand here on this balcony and marvel at the strange and beautiful ways the universe worked. She would think about the random Tuesday morning that had changed everything, about the intersection of Bedford Avenue and North 12th Street, where fate and coincidence and desperate kindness had collided to create a miracle. She would think about Martha's words, "You saved my life," but the truth was, they'd saved each other. Martha had saved Amanda from despair and loneliness and the crushing weight of believing she was utterly alone in the world. And Amanda had saved Martha from the regret that had haunted her for 28 years, from the fear that she would die without ever finding the granddaughter she'd lost. In the end, that's what kindness did. It saved people. It created connections that shouldn't be possible, bridges across impossible distances, hope in the darkest moments. Roger had tried to destroy her with cruelty. David had tried to break her with betrayal. Edward would try to defeat her with greed and manipulation. But none of them understood what Amanda had learned on that rainy Tuesday in November, that kindness was indeed the rarest currency in the world, and she was rich beyond measure. A light snow began to fall over Manhattan, the first of the season, transforming the city into something magical. Amanda held out her hand and caught a snowflake, watching it melt against her warm skin. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had guided her steps to that intersection at exactly the right moment. "Thank you for the worst day of my life. Thank you for showing me that sometimes, when you lose everything, you find exactly what you were looking for all along." Dear. And in a hospital bed 3 miles away, Martha Sterling lay awake, her heart full for the first time in 28 years, thinking about the granddaughter who had appeared like a miracle in her darkest hour, thinking about second chances and forgiveness, and the extraordinary power of a simple act of kindness. Tomorrow, they would face Edward together. Tomorrow, they would begin building a family from the rubble of lost years and missed opportunities. Tomorrow, they would fight for what was right and true and worth preserving. But tonight, grandmother and granddaughter both drifted off to sleep with smiles on their faces, secure in the knowledge that they had found each other at last, and that no amount of money or power or cruelty could ever take that away. Some stories end with happily ever after, but the best stories end with happily ever forward, with the promise of more chapters yet to be written, more adventures to share, more love to discover. And this story, the story of Amanda Clark Sterling, was just beginning. And so we close another narrative journey. If you enjoy diving into engaging stories full of plot twists, mystery and emotion, you're in the right place. For the channel to keep growing and for us to produce more stories like this one, your support is essential. Leave your like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to discover our next narrative. And now, the most important part. We want to know what you think. Who was your favorite character in this story and why? Leave your comment and your rating for the narrative. Your participation is what drives our channel.